dead in sin, alone and hopeless. A child of wrath I walked, condemned in darkness. But your mercy brought new life, and in your loving kindness raised me up with Christ and made me righteous. You have brought me back with the riches of your amazing grace and relentless love. I made alive forever with you, life forever. By your grace I'm saved, by your grace I'm saved. Lord, you are the light that broke the darkness. You satisfy my soul when I am heartless. If ever I forget my true identity, show me who I am and help me to believe. You have brought me back with the riches of your amazing grace and relentless love. I made alive forever with you, life forever. By your grace I'm saved, by your grace I'm saved. Oh! My sin has been erased. I'll never be the same. My sin has been erased. I'll never be the same. You have brought me back with the riches of your amazing grace and relentless love. I made alive forever with you, life forever. By your grace I'm saved. You have brought me back with the riches of your amazing grace and relentless love. I made alive forever with you, life forever. By your grace I'm saved, by your grace I'm saved. Oh! Hey! All right. Awesome. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Westwinds. My name is Aaron. We are so happy you're here today to experience all the things with us. Sing the songs, hear the words, pray the prayers, everything. Why don't you stand with us? We're going to sing some more, and we'll see what's next after that. There is a promised land waiting for me. Sometimes there's an ocean that lies in between. And I'll keep on traveling the path where you've been, till I'm right where you want me. That's where I will be. Freedom is coming, and it has a name. Oh, no room for my chains. Oh, you take them away. Freedom is coming, and it has a name, and it is Jesus. How sweet is the name, yeah. You said it's for freedom that I was set free. Now I walk in the victory that you won for me. And if on the journey there are walls that remain, I'll sing in the promise you're making a way. Freedom, freedom is coming, and it has a name. Oh, no room for my chains. Oh, you take them away. Freedom is coming, and it has a name, and it is Jesus. How sweet is the name. lift your name. Strongholds break, sin erased, washed by grace in the power of your name. One by one, chain by chain, watch them fall as we lift your name. Yeah, strongholds break, sin erased, washed by grace in the power of your name. Oh, one by one, chain by chain, watch them fall as we lift your name. Strongholds break, sin erased, washed by grace. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming, and it has a name. Oh, no room for my chains, so you take them away. Freedom is coming, and it has a name, and it is Jesus. How sweet is the name, and it is Jesus. How sweet is the name.
Hi. You can go ahead and grab a seat. So good to have you here this morning. My name is Cory, and so this weekend, officially, I have been the lead pastor here at Westwinds now for 6 months. And in 6 months, we've changed where you can sit 3 different times, okay? And so I hope no one gets too attached to where they sit in the service, because these chairs move a lot around here at Westwinds. But so glad to have you here. This morning crowd, you all are awesome. I'm so glad you're here. Bring in the energy at this time of day. Did everyone get some coffee in them today? We're doing all okay, good. Got your coffee, we're ready to go. I have a couple things I just want to let us know about today. First, if you want to give financially to Westwinds and the work that we share in here together, there's a few ways to do that. The easiest way, I guess for me, because of a millennial. The easiest way for me is online. That's how my family and I give. You can go to westwinds.org/donate. You can do that online. You can do that if you have the Westwinds app on your phone, and I really recommend that to you if you don't have it yet. The Westwinds app is full of all kinds of resources and things that are going around here, but you can also give via the Westwinds app. You can find that wherever you find other apps on your phone. If you don't know how to find apps on your phone, we can help you with that too. So glad about that. But you can also give with cash or check, the old-fashioned way. We got some giving boxes by these doors out here, and then also by the front door, so you can give that way as well. Speaking of all that, we are hosting on January 22nd a special event here, and it will encapsulate our morning services as well as the afternoon, a special event called the Financial Learning Experience. On January 22nd, my friend Joe Sangle is going to be here, and Joe has given his life to teaching people about personal finance. And what I like about Joe is his kind of bend towards it all is it's all about funding your dream. And so we'll be contemplating what dream has God placed on your heart. What is it that God has called you to? And then how do you prepare yourself financially to live into that? And so it'll be insanely practical, the training. It'll also be a time of really considering your own life and maybe what God might be inviting you into financially. This is a really great also outward-facing event. So if you know people in your life that could benefit from some more personal finance help, that's probably almost everybody. This would be a great thing to invite people to. Sunday morning we'll talk about, Joe will share his story about how God led him out of some really tough times financially. And then the afternoon event will be just straight up training. So you know the people in your life and what might be an appropriate thing to invite them to, but would encourage you to be there and make sure you're there and invite anybody else who you know that might benefit from that. Last but certainly not least, I want to draw your attention to a couple people in our community. As many of you know, we are in some seasons of transition. That's what brought me here. And some other areas of our community, we're also in transition. And there's been some key people from our community that have emerged to help us in this season of transition. The first is Aaron. So Aaron here, yeah. So for the next little while, Aaron has stepped into an interim music director role. And so Aaron will be leading our teams and helping prepare for these weekend gatherings. Aaron's been a part of Westwinds music for a really, really long time. You've seen him play about every instrument on stage. But he'll be doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes work, too, and helping the band prepare and serve in that way. So we're really thankful for Aaron in this season. The second is actually she's in this service. She wasn't probably want me to do this, but Kiki Pratt is all the way at the back. If you have kids, you would know that Kiki is often at the check-in area on Sundays. We have a full kids program in our second service each week. Kiki is going to step into an interim kids director role in this season and really serving our teams there. We have a really strong group of committed people serving our kids every single week. We can always use more. But Kiki is going to step in and lead that team for a season. So we always want to celebrate folks around Westwinds who are coming into new parts of their calling and their vocation in life. And those two, especially in this season, we thank you, Aaron and Kiki, for serving in this way at this time. So we're going to sing some more today. And the rest of today's gathering is going to be a little bit different, which again, it's Westwinds. You're getting used to that. My teaching today, I'm going to split it up into 3 different sections. I'm actually going to give 3 short teachings about something called Epiphany. And so I'm going to teach a little bit, we'll sing. I'm going to teach a little bit, we'll sing. I'm going to teach a little bit, and then we'll sing. And those teachings will be 8 to 10 minutes each. So if you want to time those and make sure I stay on track, you can do that as well. So we're going to sing, and I'll be back in a few minutes to talk about Epiphany. Why don't we stand and sing together?
Come, let us praise Him. Let us kneel at the throne of our God. Through His Son our salvation was bought with mercy and grace. Come, let us bow down. In His hands are the depths of the earth. With one voice we proclaim His great worth. Lord our God, and we will seek Him, our rock of salvation. Morning by morning, with thanksgiving we come, and we will bow down, with creation we cry. Sing to the Lord. Great is our God. Great is our God. Great is our God. Lord of all nations, we thank that the end of our days in your courts and declare your great ways in spirit and truth. We long for your kingdom. Bring your thunder and gather the earth. All who tremble will tell of your worth. Lord our God, and we will seek Him, salvation. Morning by morning, with thanksgiving we come, and we will bow down, with creation we cry. In daylight and darkness, we sing to the Lord. Morning by morning, with thanksgiving we come, and we will bow down, with creation we cry out. In daylight and darkness, we sing to the Lord. so good.
All right. You can go ahead and grab a seat. So, Epiphany, if you have any kind of history in maybe a more liturgical or, dare I say, traditional church, you might be familiar with Epiphany. If you haven't, you might not be familiar with Epiphany. So what I love about Epiphany is it extends the Christmas season. You know, I think in more current forms of church, we like to end with the splash. And so Lent ends with Easter, splash, and then it's over. And Advent ends with the Christmas Eve service and splash, it's over. But actually in the church calendar, in the historic church calendar, the season is not called Christmas. It's called Christmastide. And Easter is not just called Easter, it's called Eastertide. Because the idea is that we don't end the story with the splash. That the splash is the beginning of something new. And that Christmas Eve, the celebration of the birth of Christ, for Christians is the start of our calendar. It's not where we celebrate that something has ended, but we celebrate that something has begun. And so Epiphany, usually it happens right after Christmas, and then the Sunday following is when we would talk about it together as a community. And so today I want to talk about Epiphany. And this word Epiphany is it's like an awakening. It's like a realization. And so the traditional Epiphany story is the story of the Magi finding Jesus, coming to Jesus, and the entire trajectory of their lives changing. This is what Epiphany in the way of Jesus does, is that something awakens and everything is different beyond that point. See, when Jesus is born, there's this powerful leader, a powerful leader named Herod, and Herod is, can I say it, a little bit insecure about his leadership? Herod, throughout the story, has multiple moments where he feels threatened by Jesus. And what's fascinating about the whole thing is it starts when Jesus is just a child. Herod's hearing about this Jesus and the momentum and favor he's gaining. And he gathers some of his most trusted people and they say, what can we do? And they don't come up with great answers. And so Herod turns to some folks known as magi, these kind of magical astrology people looking to the stars for answers. And he says, well, can you find the Jesus? And they're like, we think we can. And so these astrologers go out and they look at the sky like they had done so many times before. And there's this star in the sky. They decide that's the star we're going to follow to Jesus. And when they find Jesus, they're faced with a decision, right? Do we turn Jesus into Herod, or do we bow down and serve Jesus? The title of this little 8-minute talk is A Star and a Kingdom. Because Epiphany in this story invites us to consider the star in which we follow, and which kingdom that star is leading us to. The Magi follow this star to Jesus, and they're faced with the decision to take the bounty they have and give it to Jesus in worship, or turn Jesus in to receive a bounty from King Herod. I mean, this would have been a career-defining opportunity for them. The most powerful person in their world has given them a mission he tried to get lots of other people to accomplish, and they were the ones who found Jesus. But instead, the trajectory of their life changes. They are forced to either honor the baby in the barn or the king in the castle. To either give up their bounty to honor this child or receive a bounty by turning him in. They've spent their life in pursuit of such a discovery. And they choose the prosperity of the baby rather than their own prosperity. They would not bow down to King Herod, but rather bow down to King Jesus. They would not sell this discovery, but rather reorient their life in response to it. See, there are many times that encounters with Jesus do this in the Gospels, where people are faced with a decision. Will they reorient their life in a new direction because of the epiphany of Jesus? Or will they continue the trajectory they once hold? Do you know it's possible to call into question the trajectory of your life? See, there's a reason Epiphany sits in the church calendar every single year, because I think this question needs to come before us often. What is the star in which I am following? And what trajectory is it leading me on? Is the star you're following worth it? All the resources that you spend on the trajectory of your life, the things you spend your time on, the things you give your energy to, the things you stress about, the things you spend your money on, the way that you use the gifts that you have in your life, is the trajectory of your life worth all of that? Does it head in the direction you want it to head into? Yeah, I think this Epiphany question is not a Christian question. Just when we're here, we're going to talk about it in the way of Jesus. So I think all humans have the opportunity to step back from their life, consider the trajectory of their life, and decide, is this where I want my life to go? But when we gather together as a Christian community, and we follow the story of Jesus, on Epiphany we consider, is the trajectory of our life leading us towards the Jesus as he's described in the Gospels? Or is the trajectory of our life leading us somewhere else? Over the last, I'd say 6 years, I've made a concerted effort in my study to learn from theologians and pastors and practitioners from oppressed and minority communities. I figure the Bible is written by oppressed minorities, primarily in its original form for oppressed minorities. Yet my education was primarily guided by white theologians who had a lot of cash in their bank accounts. And so I've made a concerted effort to try and learn from some different faithful groups of people in the church that perhaps might understand some things different than I do. One of those people is my friend Anthony Smith, and Anthony Smith has been doing a lot of work around African traditions of the church. He was a part of a group of people that wrote this book called Liberating Church, where they specifically looked at hush harbors and the practice of hush harbors. You know what hush harbors are? So during the antebellum South, as Africans were enslaved, many of them were hearing about Jesus standing outside the churches of their slaveholders. Can you imagine hearing about Jesus this way? But they began to form these secret communities, these secret church services, where they would discover ways to understand faith in Jesus through their African traditions. It was actually in these hush harbors where many escapes from slavery were planned. These gatherings, these secret churches, these underground churches were dangerous. But from these hush harbors came many of the philosophies, the history of black preaching. A lot of its roots come from these hush harbors. Anthony Smith, my friend, has been teaching about this idea called the North Star. And I want to talk to us about this North Star. Anthony Smith writes this in his section of this book, Liberating Church. He says, the North Star, also called the Polaris, is a star in the constellation Ursa Minor. For centuries, this major astronomical body hung from the heavens, giving navigational aid to travelers. By sea or land, this North Star was a ready reference, gifting explorers and merchants, both ancient and modern, coordinates to the world's known and unknown. The North Star is the North Star because of its usual placement in the sky. It's just always there. It led travelers to the northern parts of the globe. In the case of runaway enslaved Africans in the antebellum South, the North Star would lead them to northern free territories. Enslaved Africans waged many kinds of struggles, set off on their path guided by this star. Armed rebellions, disguise, the Underground Railroad, purchasing their freedom, burning slaveholder property, and more. Following this large celestial body in the night sky would lead them to new worlds. Many of our ancestors would follow this star on way to Canada. Represent. It is in these northern places, away from the surveillance of slaveocracy, that they would build new lives and worlds for their children and descendants. The North Star for participants in hush harbors came to symbolize the possibility of a new world, a free and just world, a world free of domination and oppression for those that participate in modern day hush harbors or liberating churches. The North Star may not be a faraway geographic location. The North Star may be a reference point for a new world the Spirit is making in our midst. The North Star may be more than a pointer to a new spot on the planet, but for us to sojourn to, it can be that as well. For those of us on the collective journey of decolonizing our souls, the North Star points to new theological and ecclesiological coordinates, which he uses this Greek term loci imperium, the heart of the empire. Epiphany calls us to consider our North Star. And I'd say if you long to walk in the way of Jesus, the question is your North Star leading you to a liberated world for yourself and for others? Or is your North Star leading you to being the king of your own kingdom? I've been talking about this a lot for our community. I've been using this phrase that I long for us to become good news for those among us who receive the least amount of good news. This is a kind of North Star kind of statement. It's a statement that we can set before us, a trajectory we continue to move towards. On this Epiphany, this first consideration is, would you consider the North Star in which you are following? This Epiphany, are there elements about the trajectory of your life that may need adjusting? How does your North Star lead you or not lead you towards the Jesus described in the Gospels? Perhaps this year, this is the Epiphany story you'll take with you on the journey, considering your North Star. Let's sing together as we consider these questions.
Is greater, you light our way, God, you light our way. When evil is rising, you're rising higher with power to save, with power to save. You keep hope alive, you keep hope alive from the beginning to end. Your life was stronger, rose from the grave, rose up from the grave. When evil is rising, you're rising higher with power to save, with power to save. Oh, you keep hope alive, you keep hope alive from the beginning to end. Your word never Because you're living, there's hope. Because you're breathing, there's hope. In the breaking, there's hope. In the sorrow, there's hope. For this moment, my hope. For tomorrow, there's hope. In the morning, there's hope. In the evening, there's hope. Because you're living, there's hope. Because you're breathing, there's hope. In the breaking, there's hope. In the sorrow, there's hope. For this moment, my hope. For tomorrow, you keep hope alive. You keep hope alive. From the beginning to end, your word never fails. You keep hope alive because you are alive. Jesus, you are alive. You keep hope. You keep hope alive. You keep hope alive. From the beginning to end, your word never fails. You keep hope alive because you are alive. Jesus, you are alive. You keep hope alive. You keep hope alive. From the beginning to end, your word never fails. You keep hope alive because you are alive. Jesus, you are alive.
The second big Epiphany story in the story of Jesus is the moment of Jesus' baptism. Jesus' baptism is an announcement to the world that Jesus is human, but also divine, that Jesus is God and human. So before Jesus, there was this man named John the Baptist who was announcing that the kingdom of God is here, referring to Jesus. Now, this is an interesting turn of phrase. It's a turn of phrase because up until that point, it had been common to say that the kingdom of God is near. It was a statement of hope, that there's something better than this coming, that we have this future, it's near, it's close. We as a community can live into freedom even though our lives feel like struggle. So when John the Baptist is announcing the kingdom of God is here, he's talking about Jesus. And he would baptize individuals that wanted to say they would go into the water and come out of the water with a commitment to give their lives to this present Jesus, this person named Jesus who John was announcing was here. We still practice baptism in the church today because of this moment. The reason baptism is what it is in the church today is because we believe it's a tradition that Jesus started, that we do this in the way of Jesus. One day as John was baptizing individuals, you wouldn't believe who showed up. Jesus. As Jesus finds his way through the crowds, he says to John, "I'd like you to baptize me." And John is like, "No, I can't." And Jesus is like, "No, you must." All right, And so as John baptizes Jesus, the story is told that this dove comes from the heavens or the sky. And there's this voice from heaven as reported in the scriptures. It says, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." The title of this section of teaching is about a dove and a desert. A dove and a desert, because in this moment, God announces Jesus' central being, right? That this is my son, that I am pleased with this person of Jesus, this human being who is fully human and fully divine. And you would think from this moment would begin Jesus' ministry. You would think this would be the moment that kicks the whole thing off, right? This divine affirmation has been spoken. Now it's time for Jesus to go and do all the Jesus things. But in fact, it's from this moment that Jesus enters the desert. See, it's in this moment that God empowers Jesus to live out his purpose. But it's upon receiving these words, receiving this epiphany, that Jesus must face the desert. See, the purpose of Jesus was to be human for the sake of humanity as God. So he goes to the desert to face the temptations that would be for him many times in his ministry. See, it's so important if we're going to enter a season of the desert that we understand who God has called us to be. In an epiphany, there is this moment of reflection on who does God say I am? See, we can talk about a North Star and following a North Star, but sometimes there's a deeper work that needs to be done in considering who God says you are. But who God says you are is not the end of the story. So I think sometimes what can happen is we recognize who God says we are, and then we avoid the desert of our life, right? We avoid the things we don't want to look at, the things we don't want to consider. But Jesus shows us a different way to handle the epiphany of the dove, to handle the epiphany of divine affirmations. Jesus teaches us to go to the desert, to consider the things in our life that threaten the very thing God has called us to become. I think in the desert, Jesus teaches us that the means do not justify the ends. See, if the dove dies in the desert, then nothing has been accomplished, right? If Jesus gives up his calling in the desert, he can't come out of the desert and fulfill the things that God has invited him to fulfill. See, the privilege that Jesus has access to in this story must be challenged in the desert. See, because there's the liberating thing about Jesus is that he was human, had access to the privilege, and laid it down for the sake of other people. This is what's compelling about the Jesus story. There's nothing liberating about a story of a person of privilege who uses all that power just to serve themselves. That's not a compelling story. That story didn't kick off 2,000 years of church history. That story has not inspired generation after generation after generation around the globe to lay down their lives also for the sake of others. The story of Jesus is a person, a human with immense privilege, laying it down for the sake of his calling. And this is what was so compelling about the earliest Christians. You know, the earliest Christians were called people of the way. There was a way about them. The earliest followers centered Jesus in their life. They longed to emulate this power laying down tradition of Jesus. See, they understood that the way of Jesus accomplishes the purpose of Jesus. That it's not about just what we do, but it's about how we do it. It's the way that's so compelling about the story, not the results. This concept is so important when we consider how we spend our own lives. There is a temptation in our own lives to ignore the desert because we long so much for the dove, but it's in facing the desert that we can discover the way of Jesus. Do you know that your calling in life, your own calling in life, can be a big threat to your life if we're not willing to face the desert? I've certainly been there in my own life. I was 28 years old. I was working at this church. For 3 years, I worked at this church, and it was during those 3 years identified as one of the fastest growing churches in America. I'm 28. I'm leading the creative team, sitting on the executive board of this church, having all kinds of opportunities at a really young age. We had our first child. We bought our first house. This season, from the outside looking in, was really, really good. The truth was, I'd go home at night and sit on the floor with my beautiful kid, and I couldn't even focus on what the kid was doing. My brain was somewhere else. I'd sit at night and have conversations with my wife where I was staring beyond her. Have you ever been in this place with someone you love? They're sharing things with you and your head is like somewhere else? I found myself sitting in my office at work, staring at my computer, and I would check the time, and 2 hours had gone by and I had done nothing. They just gone. Clinically, the season I was in is what people would call burnout. I was experiencing a form of burnout. I had worked so hard and given so much of my life to my calling, and I neglected the desert of my life, that it was impacting and harming some of the people I cared about the most. My friends J.R. Woodard and Dan White Jr. write about Jesus' time in the desert as 3 major temptations. And I connect with these, you may not, but they would say that Jesus was tempted in 3 ways. The first was to be productive. See, Jesus is in the desert, and Satan says to Jesus, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. This temptation to use his privilege to be productive. Produce something, Jesus. Use your divinity to feed yourself. I'd say the second temptation of Jesus was to be powerful. Satan says to Jesus in the desert, take control, apprehend what you deserve, and command the angels concerning you. You're in this terrible situation. Do whatever you can do in your power just to get out of it. Be powerful. And the third temptation was to be popular. Satan says to Jesus late in the season of temptation, after spending day after day after day in the desert, he says all of this, and he puts before him all these cities and people. He says, all of this I'll give you if you'll just bow down and worship me. The temptation to be productive, powerful, and popular are certainly temptations I had to face and continue to have to face in my own life. Because if I don't face the desert, I can kill the dove. If I don't face the challenging things in my life, the temptations in my life, it can destroy the very thing I long to live for. I'm learning over and over again, it's possible to do things for Jesus and not be doing them in the way of Jesus. I'm learning over and over and over again, it's possible to do things for Jesus and not be doing them because of Jesus. This is what the epiphany of Jesus invites us into, the epiphany of his baptism, as he had access to all these things he could do. But Jesus chose instead to face the desert of his ministry, to face the temptations he would soon face over and over and over again, and stand up against them. Because it's possible, let me say this again, to do things for Jesus and not do them in the way of Jesus. It's possible to do things for Jesus and not do them because of Jesus. It's in the desert where the way and the why behind the life we live gets challenged. Maybe it's this year that this epiphany marks a decision in your life to face the desert you've been avoiding, to consider the things that threaten the very calling on your life. See, I believe that God calls everybody to participate in his kingdom. That calling is not something that I have privilege to because I'm this pastor. In fact, that calling is something we all get to wrestle with. And that God is inviting all of us to participate in the way of his kingdom in a way that is divine and unique to you. But the biggest threat to that is the desert you refuse to enter. Perhaps this year will be the year you choose to step into the desert. And remember that God loves you and cares for you and will empower you to walk through that desert. Because on the other side of the desert is a powerful ministry in the name of Jesus.
In the light so pure and so clear. There's nothing I want and nothing to fear. You tell me that I'm free as a child. I've nothing to fear in the light of your love. In the light of your love, my heart is your home, never abandoned, never alone. Shielded and sure, my heart is your home. In the light of your love, yeah. And I wanna live in a wild abandon. I wanna know the heart of heaven, and I wanna see with eyes from above. In the light, in the light. Will you open up my eyes? 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 I wanna live in wild abandon. I wanna know the heart of heaven. And I wanna see with eyes from above. In the light, oh, in the light, light of your love, the 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 light of your love.
Have you ever had a moment or an encounter, perhaps it was a spiritual one, that completely changed the future of your life? Maybe you can think about, the birth of a child or a commitment to another human, perhaps a conversation that just changed everything in the future. The last Epiphany that I want to talk about today is a moment that changed Jesus' trajectory. It's Jesus' first miracle, right? Jesus ends up at this wedding. And these people planned this wedding and they ran out of wine. I don't know if you've ever been to a party where the alcohol runs out, but this is not time of celebration. But a wedding is supposed to be a time of celebration. It's a time of hospitality. It's a time when the people you love and care about most, you want them to experience this celebration with you. You long that people leave your wedding, at least I think most people do, feeling like they've been cared for and loved. And so running out of wine at this wedding was a big deal. And so Jesus' mother comes to Jesus and like, Jesus, like, we know you're the guy, right? You and me know. We've been together a while. Like, I know that you could fix this. Could you do something about this, Jesus? And Jesus is like, this is not my time. This is not my time. Side note, he ends up doing it. So I wonder sometimes if the mom knew it was time, but the son wasn't quite sure yet. Any moms in the room relate with these kinds of... Can we just listen to moms more often? So it turns out that Jesus turns the water into the wine, and it changes the trajectory of his life. Because now people start talking that this guy is performing miracles. He's doing the miraculous. When Jesus turns this water into wine, he sets the clock. He sets the clock on what will eventually lead to his murder, his death. And as we know the story, eventually his resurrection too. But in the human sense, he sets the clock on his life. What I want to talk about today are these two Greek words. One is this word kairos or kairos, and the other is chronos. And they're ways to understanding time. Chronos time is like a calendar or a clock, right? These people, they planned their wedding on a date and a time for people to be there. A kairos refers to like a moment of time. And often in Christian history, a kairos moment is like a divine intervention. It's a moment when God does something, when the Spirit moves in a way that transcends time. At this wedding, when Jesus performs a miracle, it's a kairos moment that fits into a chronos situation. Can you follow the difference? And I think in life, there's these epiphanies, these kairos moments exist all the time. I believe that God is active in the world all the time. And part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus is to learn to pay attention to these kairos moments amidst our chronos world. When Jesus turns the water into wine, it's this announcement, it's this epiphany that there are these divine moments that exist, that God, through Jesus, is working miracles. This kairos moment is a complete reordering of Jesus' life. His chronos would actually never be the same because of this kairos moment. No longer could Jesus lay low, but his time had come for people to begin to know who he was, who he really was. See, when we choose Jesus as our light, as our center, and receive these affirmations, right? We receive this invitation from God to participate. There will be kairos moments often that change our chronos intentions. It doesn't only change the order of our lives, but it also begins to change us too. It's actually participating in the kairos that is extremely self-transformational as well. I actually think what Jesus does to the water in this day is the exact thing that Jesus wants to do to us too. In the same way, Jesus turns this basic thing, this common thing, water, into this celebratory juice called wine, is the same thing Jesus wants to do in our lives. But it happens in the midst of chronos, time, but it's by participating in the kairos moments. Have you ever had one of these encounters? I wonder how many of these encounters exist in our life. I also wonder, have you ever backed down from a kairos moment out of fear of the chronos consequences? Ever backed down from a moment where you knew what you were supposed to do? Where perhaps you sensed God was inviting you into something, but to do that something would have significant chronos possibilities, significant chronos implications? I wonder, this epiphany, what God might be inviting you, inviting us into, that could potentially have chronos implications, that could potentially reorder our lives. I think September 4th in my journey as your pastor was a kairos moment that will continue to have chronos implications. Some of you were here on September 4th. Remember, we gathered in the lobby. And we had what was called an installation service, where I became installed officially as the pastor of Westwinds. And on that day, I made 4 commitments. Out loud, I made these commitments. It will have chronos implications. It was 4 commitments of my leadership that I felt like I'm going to say these out loud so that people can hold me accountable to them. It's a kairos commitment that will have chronos implications. I committed to you that I would lead us in a way that Jesus would be the center of our church. That we would always make an effort to center Jesus in everything we are and everything we do. I committed, the second commitment was that we'd have practice-based belonging, that people would not belong because they believed the right things or thought the right things or dressed the right way or behaved the right way, that we belong through practicing the way of Jesus. It's not doctrine, beliefs, not a certain social status or how much money you have in the account, but practice. I committed on that day that we would make an effort to be good news to those who receive the least amount of good news, that this would be the trajectory for us as a church. And I committed on that day that we'd be a place for lovers, that we would love each other in the way of Jesus, that we would learn what it is to love each other, and that this community would know we are Christians by the way that we love each other. Now, these commitments could just be airtime, right? I could just get up and say these things. But if these commitments are a kairos moment, they will have chronos implications, that we will come up against decisions every single week, every single day in the life and times of our church that will move through this kind of a filter, It's a kairos moment with chronos implications. Some of you might remember another Sunday, my friend Dr. Joanne Lyon spoke here. She got a standing ovation. I've never got a standing ovation, but that's fine. That day, she shared a scripture from Hebrews where she talked about that the scripture shares that sometimes we are entertaining angels, that when people have need and there's these kairos moments where we're invited to meet those needs, that actually we are entertaining angels. Interesting, that morning as I pulled into the parking lot, there was a rundown car in the parking lot that had been there for a couple days. And I kind of poked in and there was 2 people sleeping in the car, and I felt the Spirit invite me into a kairos moment. Talk to them. Be hospitable. You're a church, right? You're a pastor. But I was like, man, I got this really important speaker here today. She's really important to me and I think important to our community. I'll maybe on the way out. So I went in and we went through the service and we had a great morning, and then I had some meetings lined up with our elders and Dr. Lyon that afternoon. It was like I was running late because I was talking to people in the lobby, and sure enough, they're in the parking lot, and I just left. And I walked away from this kairos moment because I had more important things to do. After all, I am the pastor of the church. It's funny how these things happen, but that afternoon I got a call from someone at Westwinds saying, hey, I met these people in their parking lot. What should I do? Their car is broken down and they're trying to get it figured out, and they're trying to get out, and they're saying, I think I should go buy them some food. It's a great idea. It's interesting sometimes that we miss these kairos moments, and the way that God continues to shape us when we miss these kairos moments and continues to invite us deeper, that in this moment, the pastor learned something from the community, from someone in our community who entered the kairos moment that I refused for hours that day because my chronos responsibilities were just too large to stop for these people who were stranded in our parking lot. I think as Westerners, we worship chronos time. our calendars. Everything is a schedule. Everything is about what I can accomplish. But I think what God is inviting us into more and more and more are these Kairos moments. They're everywhere around us all the time. And I wonder if this epiphany, maybe for you this year, would to be intent, to be maybe paying attention to these Kairos moments. That this epiphany might be a day when you decide, God, I'm going to say yes to these Kairos moments in my life whenever I see them. I'm going to take some risk in my Chronos life to enter these Kairos opportunities. Why do we organize the service this way this year? Is because my hope is that this year you would take one of these three stories with you on the journey of this year. I think this would be a lot to try and take it all with you at once. But maybe for some of us, the story we need to carry with us is a change of the trajectory of our life. That this epiphany you would take with you throughout this year and work towards, in the way of Jesus, changing the trajectory of your life. Maybe that's your epiphany at this year's Epiphany. Or perhaps some of us in the room, the story we'll take with us is Jesus in the desert. Maybe there's some of us that have a desert we've been avoiding for a really, really long time, and this is the year we will no longer avoid that desert. This is the year where I'm not going to allow that desert to be a threat on the calling of my life. I'm going to walk that desert in the way of Jesus and pursue healing and health in the future. Or perhaps the story you'll take with you is the story of the first miracle. And consider that this is the year that you're going to live into Kairos moments again and again and again, and not be enslaved by the Chronos reality of our world. So here's what I'm going to do. A year from today, I'm going to speak the same message. It's going to be Epiphany again. Did you know that? A year from today, I'm going to preach this exact same message. We're going to look at all three of these stories again in 1 year's time. And what I want to encourage you to do is take one of these with you on a 365-day journey. And a year from today, when I speak this message, we will ask each other, we will consider, how has God changed me and transformed me because of the epiphany that I took with me on this year's journey. Does that sound like a plan? All right, we're going to sing together, and then we're going to go out in light of Epiphany.
Let's stand together and sing this. And this is a song, it's very vertical facing. It's a song sung to God in a way, but it's a very transformational verbiage, transformational words. So that seems appropriate. I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. And man's empty praise, treasures that fade, are never enough. And you came along, and you put me back together. Desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you, Lord. There's nothing that's better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. He's the God of the mountain. He's the God of the valley. And there's not a place your mercy and grace will not find me again. Oh, yeah, there's nothing that's better than you. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. You're changing us. You're changing us. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you. Lord, there's nothing that's better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Yeah. Turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. Yes, you do. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you, Lord. There's nothing that's better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing that's better than you, Lord. There's nothing that's better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. It's been a great morning, yeah? Go from this place knowing that if you change is a process, it's not a one and done thing. So we're all growing together. We're all changing over time. Go with that blessing. Have a great week, everybody.